The morning mist still clung to the trunks of the redwoods when Marcus Thornfield began his work. The sound of the axe chopping wood echoed through the Oregon forest with the regularity of a metronome, breaking the silence that only the morning birds dared to challenge. Marcus was a large man with calloused hands that told the story of 30 years dedicated to that ancient profession. His grey eyes, deep as the winter sky, observed each tree with respect before deciding which one to fell. He was not just a lumberjack, he was a guardian who understood that each tree had its time, its purpose. That October morning, the air was different. Marcus felt it as soon as he stepped out of his cabin, a rustic structure he had built himself 15 years ago when he decided that the solitude of the forest was preferable to the suffocating noise of the city. There was something in the wind, a restlessness that made the animals move strangely, more alert, as if they sensed some invisible shift in the natural balance of things. He shook his head, pushing those thoughts away. Superstitions were for city folk who came hiking on weekends and got scared by their own reflection in the lakes. The day's work was planned, felling 3 fir trees that had already completed their cycle, marked weeks ago by the creaking of their trunks and the dark spots indicating internal decay. Marcus always worked alone, preferring his own pace to the noise of industrial chainsaws and the rush of large logging groups. He was one of the last of his kind, a traditional lumberjack who still used hand tools and respected the forest's rhythm. Some called him old-fashioned, others romantic. Marcus didn't care about labels. He simply knew his place in the world. The first fir tree fell with the heavy grace that only a centuries-old tree possesses, toppling exactly where Marcus had calculated without damaging the surrounding plants. He paused, wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, and took a sip of coffee from the crumpled thermos he always carried. It was in this moment of silence, when the echo of the fall still resonated among the trees, that he heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible sound coming from the north, a groan, a cry. Marcus frowned, turning his head to better capture the direction. There it was again, clearer this time. It was definitely a human sound, and it sounded desperate. Without hesitation, Marcus dropped his axe and began running toward the sound. His feet knew every root, every stone hidden beneath the dead leaves. The forest was his home, and he moved through it with the confidence of someone who knows every corner. The sound grew louder as he advanced, guiding him like a beacon through the dense vegetation. His heart pounded, not only from the physical exertion, but from the certainty that someone needed urgent help. In 30 years of wandering through that forest, Marcus had rarely encountered other human beings. The area where he worked was miles from any official trail, too far for casual hikers. After about 15 minutes of running uphill, Marcus spotted a scene that chilled his blood. A young woman was trapped under a fallen log, her right leg completely immobilized by the weight of the wood. She was pale, her lips had a worrying bluish tint, and her eyes, when they saw him, gleamed with a mixture of relief and terror. She was dressed in hiking clothes, but completely unsuitable for that part of the forest. Her backpack was a few meters ahead, its contents scattered on the ground as evidence of a violent fall. "Help, please," she whispered, her voice hoarse from screaming. "My leg, I can't feel it anymore." Marcus knelt beside her immediately, his mind already analyzing the situation with the cold clarity of someone who had spent his life solving practical problems. The log was oak, too heavy for him to lift alone without causing further damage. The woman's leg was at an awkward angle, probably fractured, and judging by the paleness and tremors running through her body, she was going into shock. He needed to act fast. "My name is Marcus," he said in a low, firm voice, making eye contact with her. "You're safe now. I'm going to get you out of here, but I need you to trust me and do exactly what I say. Can you do that?" She nodded weakly, tears rolling down her dirt-stained cheeks. "My name is Sarah. I got lost yesterday." I was following a trail, but I lost my way. I spent the night trying to find my way back, and then the hillside gave way. I fell, and the log fell on top of me. Marcus surveyed the surrounding terrain. The hillside had indeed given way recently, likely due to the previous week's rains that had saturated the soil. Sarah was lucky to be alive. If the tree trunk had fallen a few inches further to the left, it would have crushed her chest. He quickly assessed his options. There was no cell phone signal there. It was at least a 3-hour walk to his cabin and another hour from there to the nearest road. Sarah didn't have time for that. "I'll need to use a lever to lift the log," Marcus explained as he moved, searching for a branch strong enough. "When I lift it, you'll need to pull your leg out. It'll hurt a lot, but it's our only chance. Then I'll stabilize your leg and carry it to a safe place." You can carry me?" Sarah asked, incredulous, observing the distance and then Marcus's size. "I've carried logs heavier than you for twice the distance," Marcus replied with a small smile, trying to reassure her. It wasn't exactly true, but she didn't need to know that. He found what he was looking for, a walnut branch, strong and long enough to serve as a lever. With precise movements, he positioned a large stone as a fulcrum and wedged the branch under the log. "When I say now, you pull. Understood?" Sarah nodded, biting her lower lip to brace herself for the pain. Marcus shifted all his weight to the end of the branch, his muscles tensing beneath his flannel shirt. For a moment, nothing happened. The trunk was even heavier than he had estimated, but Marcus Thornfield was not a man to give up. With a roar of effort, he pressed with all his might, his boots digging furrows into the soft ground. The trunk began to move, lifting inch by inch. "Now!" he shouted. Sarah screamed in pain as she pulled at her leg, using her elbows to drag herself along. It was the most horrible sound Marcus had ever heard, but he maintained pressure on the lever until it was completely released. Only then did he let go, and the log fell back down with a dull thud to the ground. Marcus moved quickly. From Sarah's scattered backpack, he grabbed a water bottle and an extra t-shirt. He tore the t-shirt into strips while assessing her leg. The fracture was obvious. The bone hadn't pierced the skin, which was a small miracle, but the swelling was already severe. He used straight branches and the strips of fabric to create an improvised splint, working with the efficiency of someone who had already treated countless injuries alone in the forest. "Did you learn that as a lumberjack?" Sarah asked through clenched teeth, trying to distract herself from the pain. "I learned out of necessity," Marcus replied, carefully tightening the last strip. "When you work alone in the forest, you need to know a little bit of everything. I've treated deep cuts, broken an arm once, had terrible food poisoning another time. You learn or you die." He helped Sarah drink water, noticing the signs of dehydration. She probably hadn't been drinking properly since she got lost. From his own pocket, Marcus pulled out a crushed protein bar and offered it to her. "Eat this, you need energy." While Sarah ate slowly, Marcus improvised a stretcher using sturdy branches and his own jacket, tying everything together with the rope he always carried. It wasn't comfortable, but it would do. The problem now was the journey. 3 hours of walking over uneven terrain, carrying an injured person. Marcus was 52 years old. He was no longer the young man who could carry a log on his back all day. But looking at Sarah, seeing the fear and hope mixed in her eyes, he knew there was no choice. "Ready?" he asked, positioning himself to lift the makeshift stretcher. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "I was going to die here. I really was going to die." "Not on my shift," Marcus said simply, and began to walk away. The first 2 hours were brutal. The mountainous terrain offered no respite. Each step demanded total concentration to avoid tripping and causing further harm to Sarah. Marcus stopped every 20 minutes, repositioning his hands, adjusting the stretcher, checking the splint. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, the shock and pain taking their toll. During the moments she was awake, she spoke. Marcus learned that she was 28 years old, worked as a graphic designer in Portland, and was hiking that trail to clear her head after a difficult breakup. She had underestimated the forest, thought she knew the way, strayed from the marked trail to take a better photo. "I was so stupid," she murmured in one of her lucid moments. "My mother always said I was too stubborn for my own good." "The forest doesn't forgive mistakes," Marcus said, but his voice lacked judgment. "But it also offers second chances to those who are lucky. You were lucky I was around." "Why were you so far from everything?" Sarah asked. "Aren't there areas closer to civilization to work in?" Marcus was silent for a moment, his steps maintaining a steady rhythm. "I like solitude. People are complicated. Trees are honest. They grow, live their lives, die. No drama, no lies, no complications." "This seems lonely." "Yes, but it's a solitude I chose." Marcus paused to rest, carefully placing the stretcher on the floor. His arms burned, his back screamed in protest, but he didn't show it. He drank water, offered more to Sarah, checked his pulse. It was weak, but steady. "It wasn't always like this. I had a family once, wife, young daughter. They lived in Seattle. I worked in construction, earned well. We had a nice house." Sarah watched him, waiting for him to continue. There was something in his voice, an old pain that isolation hadn't completely healed. "There was an accident," Marcus continued, his eyes fixed on some distant point. "Drunk driver. My wife Claire died instantly. My daughter Emma lived for 3 days in the hospital. She was 6 years old." He took a deep breath, as if the air could somehow lessen the weight he still carried. "After that, I couldn't live that life anymore. Everything reminded me of them. Every corner, every playground, every child's laughter in the street. So I came here. I thought that in the forest, far from everything, the pain would be less." "And was it?" Sarah asked softly. "No. The pain has just changed form. But here at least I can breathe. I can wake up without having to pretend I'm okay. The trees don't expect me to get over it or move on. They're just there, silent witnesses." Sarah reached out, lightly touching Marcus's arm. "I'm so sorry. I can't even imagine." "Oh, there's no need to imagine, and there's no need to feel sorry." Marcus stood up, picking up the stretcher again. "Let's continue. We still have a long way to go." The last hour was the hardest. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows between the trees. The temperature was dropping rapidly, as it always did at that time of year in the mountains. Marcus knew that if they didn't reach the cabin before nightfall, they would have to spend the night outdoors, and Sarah wouldn't survive that in her condition. He quickened his pace, ignoring the burning in his muscles, the weight that seemed to increase with each passing minute. That's when the ground betrayed his tired feet. A root hidden beneath the leaves caught his boot, and Marcus stumbled. Instinctively, he turned to shield Sarah from the fall, landing on his back and absorbing the impact. Pain shot through his ribs, robbing the air from his lungs. For a moment, he simply lay there, gazing at the canopy of trees above, wondering if he could ever get up. "Marcus, Marcus, are you all right?" Sarah's voice was filled with panic. With a groan, Marcus rolled to his side and forced himself to his knees. Each breath hurt. He'd probably cracked or broken a rib. But Sarah was safe. The stretcher had cushioned her fall. "I'm okay," he lied, slowly getting up. "We're almost there." And they were. 10 minutes later, Marcus's cabin emerged from among the trees, its familiar shape bringing such intense relief that Marcus almost fell again. He brought Sarah inside, carefully placing her on the sofa near the fireplace. He lit the fire, gathered blankets, and prepared hot tea. Only then did he allow himself to sit down. each movement an agony. "I need to call for help," he said, grabbing the emergency radio he kept for extreme situations. The forest might be his sanctuary, but Marcus wasn't a fool. He always maintained a way to contact the outside world for emergencies. It only took him a few minutes to explain the situation to the Forest Rescue Service. A helicopter would be dispatched at dawn as soon as there was enough light for a safe landing in the small clearing near the cabin. That night, while Sarah slept restlessly on the sofa and the fire crackled in the fireplace, Marcus lay awake in his armchair watching the flames. His body ached in ways he hadn't felt in years, but there was something more. A strange feeling, as if something had changed inside him. For 15 years, he had isolated himself, building walls around his heart as thick as the logs he cut. He had convinced himself that he didn't need anyone else, that solitude was not only acceptable but preferable. But in saving Sarah, something had awakened within him. The feeling of human connection, of importance, of making a difference in someone's life. He had forgotten how powerful that was. He looked at the young woman sleeping, her skin still pale, but breathing more regularly now, protected and safe. Emma would be 21 now, perhaps similar to Sarah in some way. The thought brought pain, but for the first time in many years, it wasn't a paralyzing pain. It was a gentle pain, like the scar of an old wound that was finally beginning to heal. The helicopter arrived at sunrise, its sound tearing through the morning silence. The paramedics were efficient and professional, stabilizing Sarah properly and preparing her for transport. Marcus stood outside the cabin, watching as they carried her onto the appropriate medical stretcher. Sarah insisted on speaking with him before leaving. "Marcus," she said, gripping his hand with surprising strength, "you saved my life. There aren't enough words to thank you." "No need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same." "That's not true, and you know it." She reached into her pocket with difficulty, pulling out a crumpled business card. "When I get out of the hospital, I'd like to come visit you, if you'll allow me. I'd like to get to know the man who saved me better." Marcus took the card hesitantly. Part of him wanted to refuse, to keep his solitude intact, but another part, a part that had lain dormant for too long, wanted to accept. "The forest can be dangerous for those unfamiliar with it," he finally said. "Then perhaps you can teach me how to recognize her properly," Sarah smiled, despite the pain. "I promise that this time I will bring the proper equipment." Marcus nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "I'll wait." The months that followed brought changes for Marcus Thornfield. Sarah kept her word. After 3 surgeries and months of physical therapy, she returned to the forest, this time properly prepared and with Marcus as her guide. She didn't come alone. She had brought a therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Morrison, who had worked with Sarah during her recovery and was intrigued by the story of the lone lumberjack. "Sarah told me her story," Dr. Morrison said during one of his visits, while Marcus made coffee in his simple kitchen, "not just about the rescue, but about why you're here, alone. If I may say so, I think you've been carrying a burden you don't need to carry alone." Marcus was about to politely decline, as he always did with any attempt at a deep conversation, but something stopped him. Perhaps it was the honesty in the doctor's eyes, or perhaps it was simply the weariness of carrying that burden for so long. "I don't know how to stop," he finally admitted. "I don't know how to live with the guilt of having survived when they didn't." "Survivor's guilt is real and debilitating," Dr. Morrison said softly. "But it's not something you have to face alone. And it's not something you overcome by isolating yourself from the world. Your wife and daughter wouldn't want that for you." The words struck Marcus like a thunderbolt. Claire had always encouraged him to live life to the fullest, to embrace life in all its forms. Emma had loved him unconditionally, had laughed out loud, had filled each day with joy. They wouldn't have wanted him to spend 15 years hiding in the forest, punishing himself for being alive. The visits became regular. Sarah came every few weeks, sometimes bringing friends, sometimes just her and Marcus walking through the forest while she practiced her newfound skills. She had become an advocate for the forests, using her design talent to create awareness campaigns about environmental preservation. Marcus had become her inspiration, the living example of someone who respected and understood nature. But the most significant change came when Marcus decided, after much reflection, to start working as a volunteer forest guide. He began teaching young people from the nearby town about the forest, about respect for nature, about survival and conservation. He discovered he had a knack for teaching, that his decades of experience could benefit others. And most importantly, he discovered that allowing people back into his life didn't diminish the memory of Claire and Emma. In fact, it honored them. A year after the rescue, Sarah organized a small gathering at Marcus's cabin. Present were her parents, thrilled to meet the man who had saved their daughter, Dr. Morrison, some of the young people Marcus had begun teaching, and the head of the Forestry Service, who had come to discuss the possibility of Marcus becoming an official forest ranger. "For Marcus," Sarah said, raising a glass of cheap wine they had brought from town, "the man who saved me, and in doing so began to save himself." Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes. He had spent so long believing that his purpose had died along with his family, that there was nothing left for him but solitude and hard work. But in saving Sarah, he had rediscovered something fundamental. Every life has value. Every day is an opportunity, and the love we feel for those we have lost doesn't need to isolate us from the living. That night, after everyone had left, Marcus stood outside his cabin, gazing at the stars that shone through the tree branches. The air was cool, clean, filled with the fragrances he had come to love. The forest was still his home, but it was no longer his prison. He had learned that he could honor the past while building a future, that the solitude he had chosen out of necessity could transform into community by choice. "Claire, Emma," he whispered to the night wind, "I think I'm finally learning to live again. I hope you're proud of me." The wind blew through the trees, producing a soft sound that almost seemed like an answer. Marcus smiled, his calloused hands opening and closing, still strong, still capable. There was more work to do, more lives to touch, more stories to live. The lumberjack who had saved a life in the forest had in the process found a way to save his own. Years later, when the young men Marcus had taught became forest rangers themselves, when Sarah married and brought her first child to meet the man she called Uncle Marcus, when the isolated cabin became a meeting point for nature lovers and lost souls in need of guidance, the people of the region began to tell the story of the lumberjack and the woman he saved. But those who knew Marcus well knew that the story was deeper than that. It was a story about how sometimes, in saving another human being, we save ourselves. How human connection can find us even in the most remote places. How pain, however deep, doesn't have to be the end of our story, and how forests, in all their ancient wisdom, bear witness not only to our survival, but to our capacity to heal, grow, and flourish again. Marcus Thornfield continued to live in the forest, but no longer as a man hidden from the world. He lived as a bridge between nature and humanity, teaching respect, promoting healing, and proving that it is never too late to allow the light back into our lives. The forest remained his home, but his heart, which had been frozen for so long, finally found warmth again. And on quiet nights, when the fire crackled in the hearth and the wind sang through the pines, Marcus sometimes thought about that October morning when he heard a distant cry in the forest. A simple choice: ignore it and continue his work, or run towards the unknown to help. He had chosen to run, and that choice had changed everything. The trees surrounding his cabin continued to grow, silent witnesses to the transformation of a man who had learned that true strength lies not only in surviving alone, but in having the courage to allow others into our lives, into our pain, into our stories. Marcus Thornfield, the lumberjack who saved a life in the middle of the forest, had finally understood that in doing so, he had given himself permission to live again.